Welcome to What Drives You with your host, Mike Gourdet. Human solution consultant from Seattle, Washington. It is now time to sit back, buckle up for the show that drives the asking question of what drives you. And now your host, Mike Gourdet.
Welcome to this week's episode of What Drives You, the show about why we do the things we do. This is the first week in March, and I'm your host, Mike, a human solutions consultant right here in Seattle, Washington. Today's episode, we are not going to have our normal guest spot, so we're going to jump into a couple of topics. The first topic is morality, and then we're going to talk about Zoom fatigue, and then we're going to end up with the question of the day, which is kind of a back into last week's question, which was, why do we gossip? So this week's question is, why are we nosy? So hang out. We'll be right back for our main topic. So we're going to talk about morality, and it seems like that's a pretty simple thing. But again, that's what happens. What topics I bring up can be very simple in seeming form, but when you start looking at it more closely, it becomes rather complicated. So, defining morality, we could just say it's the difference between right and wrong. But there's a problem with that, because what is right and what is wrong? See, these are value-laden words that we place on this idea. Okay, so there's two basic theories of what morality is, right? The first basic theory is morality is the rules set forth by the society in which it originates. And that is something that I've talked about several times in different forms, but we have social rules, and those rules are set forth by the identity of the social system that is setting those rules, and those rules are designed to include people and help with the social bonding in those social groups. But the other theory is morality is something that all humans believe. And that gets a little trickier, because what is something that all humans believe in? So we're going to take that one out of the context, I think, because that one is more of a philosophical thing. Because if we look at human behavior and this idea of morality, they don't actually link up the way that we would think they would according to a normative value. We all engage in certain behaviors that we all believe in, that we all do, but when we look at it through a moral lens, these are not really things that we consider to be moral. And if you look at things like religion, which is one of the quickest ways to sort of understand the first definition of morality, we see that a lot of times morality is something other than our base behaviors. And when I talk about our base behaviors, I'm talking about those that form our mammalian system. Selfishness, eating, having sex, all these things that we do as part of our animal heritage, if you will, is often considered immoral or amoral when we look at it through the lens of other things. So when we talk about morality through these other lenses, like our societal rules or religious rules or whatever we're looking at things that sort of curtail our natural tendencies. For instance, stealing. That is a standard way of looking at what's moral and immoral. Okay. But again, this is a complex issue, right? So if you own something and I take that from you by force, I am doing something wrong because by rights, that is in your possession. It belongs to you, right? So we have laws set up against this. We call it thievery, burglary. Where there's several different types of thieving, but they all come with punishments. And those punishments, like I've said before, those punishments are allayed against those crimes in order to get the perpetrator of those crimes to reform. Okay. We have this idea that punishment ultimately is a form of rejection in order to get compliance from the person that is breaking the social rules in order for them to be brought back into the group identity, because we don't want those differences out there. And that's because it threatens our identity within that group, or rather, it threatens the identity of the group, right? Because if you have one person that is going against the rules, we have what's called influence over other people in the group, and that they will start doing that as well. And the people in charge of the group, they don't want that to happen, because that means they get to lose power, because their power is based on the idea that they are set up to control the group identity. And part of that is the making of rules and the punishment of, or not punishment, the maintaining of the rules that govern the behaviors in those groups. So you can see how quickly that becomes kind of out there. So it brings us back to this question of what is morality? It's the difference between right and wrong, and what is considered right and wrong is often determined by the social system in which we live in. And that runs the gamut from the small nuclear family all the way up to the larger global community. You know, murder is considered to be immoral. Lying is considered to be immoral, which is an interesting topic, because I've talked about lying before. Lying is also a social glue. So we have these definitions of what is right and what is wrong, or what is bad and what is good. And those are often defined by our unit, our group unit. And if you followed the other pieces of this podcast where I talk about group dynamics, this is a very complex system, because each group we belong to has an identity which belongs to a group, a larger group that has an identity which belongs to an even larger group. So we are having these group dynamics trying to interact with each other and things like that. So when we talk about the morality of a person, we have to take into consideration all these groups that this person belongs to, because you belong to several groups throughout your life plan, right? You're going to belong to your own identity based on your own idea of who you are. That is influenced by all the people around you. You are going to find people that you are similar to, and those similarities are going to define a group identity, and that group in and of itself becomes an individual based on that identity, which perpetrates those identifiers to the rest of the groups, right? And then when we have groups that are opposed to each other, that's where we start to see conflict occurring. So it really is an interesting, it is a philosophical conversation about what morality is and isn't. You know, we have terms in our system which convey these ideas, one of which is very often used in the political scene, and that is traditional family values. And that, again, is based on conservative ideas of what morality should be. And then we take that and then we try to apply that to other people. Okay, do you see how this becomes super complicated really fast? It's because when we have these groups meeting each other, we are socially inclined. We are social animals. We're basically, one of the interesting things that there is evidence for is that human beings, despite what we think, human beings typically do not like to typically human beings do not like to foment violence on other human beings. We don't like to kill other human beings. And that is a norm. That is a normative that we could argue could be a moral thing, because we don't like to do that. There is a piece of us that rebels against that idea. And if you want to learn more about this, the book, there's two books, and I can't remember the author right off the top of my head, but the two books are called On Killing and On Combat. And I think he talks about this in both of those books, about how human beings are, in general, adverse to harming another human being. And I know that seems weird, because when we look at our news outlets, we often see violence, and we see, especially this year or this past year, we've seen a lot of violence. So again, there is no simple way of going through this. What we can talk about, though, is how do we manage this? Well, the easiest person to look at this in this instance is Freud. Freud had a 3-section system of governing the human person, and that is ego, superego, and id, or id, ego, and superego. So id is all of our basic drives. Id is the I want, I need, I will have, right? It's where we get the 7 deadly sins from the religious context: greed, sloth, all these things. And then the superego is what tries to govern all these rules that we have been taught by society as to what is right and what is wrong. So the superego is Freud's idea of what the seat of morality is in the human psyche. And the ego, in Freudian terms, not the normal, what we consider ego today, the ego is the balancer, is the one that balances the superego from the id. So because it's a constant struggle between the id and the superego, if you kind of look at it like that, as these are the id and the superego are on opposite ends of a spectrum, and the ego is moving back and forth trying to maintain a balance on that focal beam. So I don't know why I wanted to talk about this today. It just really got way out of hand. So here we are, trying to figure out what that means. And we can't say that there's too much that a human being would do that every other human being would do that doesn't connect to this idea of morality, except maybe that we don't really want to harm other people. And of course, there is significant evidence out there that there is a portion of the population that will indeed harm and kill other human beings. So obviously it doesn't match up to that normative definition. And again, that's where we get into these ideas of descriptors. Normative means most people that do it. So when somebody says be normal, they're saying do what most people are doing. So I'm going to leave that up to you as to decide what actually morality means. But, the quickest definition, the easiest definition to understand is the rules that the society creates to govern that behavior. What is right, what is wrong. So don't take other people's stuff, don't lie, don't the 10 commandments, that would be a morality scale. The code of Hammurabi, if you even know what that is, look at ancient Mesopotamia for that. The code of Hammurabi is the first codified laws. So the laws exist to give society a framework from which to be moral or be ideal in that society. And we can obviously take that all over the place and talk about how certain laws are unjust or certain things are unjust. And we don't really need to go there. You can do that on your own. I'm just talking about it in a general sense. So that's what morality is supposed to be. But obviously, we can't really just stick a fork in it and say it's done. But this is part of our daily life, is trying to figure out what is right, what is wrong based on what everybody else is doing. Right. So when we go and we do things with other people, we tend to fold into their idea of what behavior is proper and not. Right. So when in Rome, do what the Romans do. And what part of the super ego does in that narrative is it creates a sense of guilt when we violate those rules, right? And that's where we get sort of these other emotional responses that equate to certain rule breaks. When we do something wrong, we feel guilty. And again, when we look at it through everything else we've talked about, it really depends on what your beliefs are to determine whether or not you feel guilty about something, because it's a very different thing if you steal something because you're trying to survive, or you're hungry or your family needs to eat, versus stealing stuff just because you want to. Now, conceptually speaking, each one of those are considered a crime and are amoral or immoral, but there are varying degrees of connotations or context around those things. And you could argue that somebody who is just stealing to survive may not feel guilty. Or we can take it into a different realm and say, if you take paper clips from your office, you're less likely to feel guilty about it, even though it's exactly the same thing as taking a printer home or a computer home. It's taking possession away from somebody else. I worked in the restaurant world when I first got out of high school, like probably many of you have. And we would have conversations about what that is. In the restaurant business, it's called graft. It's giving away food to your friends. It's giving free food to yourself. It's, snacking at the prep table or whatever is technically stealing, because the store paid for that inventory and now you are consuming it. In the context of a capitalist marketing thing, the restaurant invested a certain amount of value in what you were eating or giving away. And when you do that, the owner of that produce does not get the profits from that. So technically speaking, that is theft. Of course, there's a lot of this all over the place. When I worked at a pizza joint, and it was not an uncommon thing for the manager to cook us a pizza and put it in the back and everybody would eat it. And it was not an uncommon thing to come in for lunch, and if the manager liked you, he would give you the pizza. And it was not uncommon for us to call someone else's restaurant and make a exchange of goods through a barter system where we would barter pizza for, say, barbecue wings or spaghetti or something. That was not an uncommon occurrence. So we can see these multiple levels of morality going on in these group settings. From a employee standpoint, you typically got in trouble if you gave yourself a pizza. But if the manager gave it to you, it was okay because that was his discretion. Technically, it was still graft. We were taking away from the restaurant, but it is what comes through formal rules and informal rules. And again, it's that nebulous gray area that we talk about as to what actually is the moral thing to do here. And then we can see this in play in different types of people who either are very rule oriented, so they follow the rules, and we often have derogatory terms for them. We tend to call them goody two shoes. I don't know if they still call them that, but that's what we called them when I was younger, goody two shoes. I'm sure there are other ones that you could think of. And then there's this big middle ground where everything's okay. And then down here on the other spectrum, you have the criminals and various other derogatory terms that go for them. So you have this interesting normative value of each end of this spectrum of morality, both being considered derogatory by the large middle portion of the group. So very interesting, just a very interesting, fascinating subject is this. But from that standpoint, again, from the Freudian standpoint, it's the superego that tries to maintain these ideas where it's battling the id and some extents the ego, trying to make sure that the need of the id is satisfied enough that the superego can remain in control. We talk about a lot of things like if you're an extraordinarily nice guy or a nice girl or a nice person, there's a term called being top heavy on superego, and that means you are so nice that people tend to walk on you. There's very little respect, and I think we've talked about that in former episodes too. And then there's the other end of the spectrum where we call people who are very hedonistic or id oriented beasts, right? They act like animals. They lie, they steal, they cheat, they do whatever. And so there's this wide spectrum. And where do we get that? We get it from our socialization. We get it from our socialization and our needs. So I think that's where I'm going to leave it. So morality is more complex than we think it is. It's not simply just right and wrong. It's how do you define what is right, what is wrong? Typically speaking, from a very realistic standpoint, right and wrong is determined by the society and groups that we live in. But even that is not as simple because we all have our different groups that we are part of that belong to different groups. So just keep in mind that if we can understand this dynamic, we can start to understand why people are the way they are. We can make inferences into things. Like somebody who's very rule oriented, we can call them moral, but we can also see that there's probably a large amount of security for that person in that structure. Whereas somebody who is not moral or considered moral, we can see a lot of boundary issues that they have problems with maintaining. They probably have a lot of social issues or social problems getting along with other people. There's often mental health issues that go along with that as well. And again, I'm not saying that there's not any on this other end of the spectrum, because there is, but we can just make inferences about behavior from these two standpoints as to what's moral and what's not moral, and what is a social norm, social rule, social value versus a need-driven behavior. I mean, the bottom line here is that we all struggle with this idea of morality, all of us, because we want things, we need things that are considered from that moral structure to be wrong. Premarital sex in many cases, from a religious standpoint, any type of hedonistic behavior. You don't take more than you need. That's a common rule that we see in these types of settings. Don't lie. But again, it's a puzzle. So there you go. That's what we're going to talk about today. We'll come right back and we're going to talk about another topic, which is Zoom fatigue, which you probably have felt. And then we're going to get finished with our question of the day, which is, why are people nosy? We'll be right back. So one of the byproducts of this past year is that many of us have gone virtual. And for many, this seems to be this boon that we've discovered, right? There's a lot of people that have fought this sort of idea in relation to working and having to go to an office and saying, look, now we can be virtual. Well, we've shown that we can handle this. However, there is a funny byproduct that's coming out of this that we've actually gotten an informal title to, which is called Zoom fatigue. And it is very prevalent. And if you haven't experienced it, that's okay. It's an interesting thing where we spend so much time in a virtual world that at the end of that time frame, we are literally exhausted. I've experienced this. I know a lot of people have experienced this. This is one of those things in which technology intersecting with psychology or biology has created more problems that we didn't know that existed until it happened. And that's kind of the curse of technology, is that we do this. Our drive to create technology is often to solve problems that we think we have, but the creation of the technology reveals other problems that we didn't know we have. So this is one of those that has created an issue, and that is called Zoom fatigue. And so far, it's not a huge deal. It's just sort of that's interesting. So why is this occurring? Well, it basically taxes the brain. Okay. It makes the brain work harder. And one of the reasons, there's a few reasons why this is. Okay. One of the first reasons is that we're social beings. And what happens when we are face to face with each other is that we are naturally observing things that is going on in those interactions from an unconscious level. And so we're using that to help communicate with the people that we are around physically. And it's a very natural thing for us to do. And it's very, very unconscious. It also is kind of funny, and we'll talk about this probably in a later episode, but it's the difference between understanding body language and not. Most people don't understand body language anymore because we focus so much on language, which is interesting here because that's the piece in which the virtual platforms make us do, right? So when we are looking at things through a virtual format, we don't have the benefit of all that other additional information coming through. So we are trying to work harder at finding it. So our brain is kicked into high gear trying to find those other pieces of information that we get normally through physical proximity to other human beings as we communicate with each other. And so here we are on this platform that we typically only see from, well, from where you see me, from the chest up. So you're missing a large part of what's going on. Uh, and some of the theories out there say that it forces our brain to concentrate harder on the language itself. Now, that may be true as well. But the one thing that we are missing is that we are missing all these other cues. So our brain is actually just is working harder to try and understand what is going on. So that's one thing that's going on that creates this Zoom fatigue. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you know this, but the brain actually uses about 20% of our caloric intake. So we burn 20% of our total daily calories just by using our brain. And you can think about this from a survival instinct. Our brain doesn't want to work that much. Our brain wants safety, and when it feels safe, it goes into autopilot, and we just sort of just chill. That is why that's the paradox. That's another paradox of the human creation, is that the survival mechanisms operate in a way that wants us to be sedentary. It conserves energy. Why? Because in an emergency situation, we're going to have to use that energy to get out of the emergency situation. But at the same time, in our modern society, we have created all these false emergencies that burn our energy away. Interesting. It's always fascinating to me. So when we are looking at these screens all day, we are creating this system where our brain has to work overtime, and so it's burning off energy. That's why we're tired. One of the other things is that when we are talking to other people, and let's say we have a group setting here, right? And there's two people talking in this group, we are still paying attention to these other people through our our peripheral vision, right? So our peripherals are picking up. That's what I was trying to say earlier, is that our peripheral vision can't pick up anything off the screen. Also, the quality of the video can impede some of that process. I didn't mention that, but the video quality cannot pick up on some of the nuances of what humans do and twitches and things like that. But at any rate, while we're in a group setting, we do this naturally. When we're doing it on a screen, we have the Brady Bunch effect, right? So we have all these people in boxes, and we have to individually attend to that. And while we're trying to do that, our brain is still trying to figure out what's going on. So it actually creates a situation where we start losing communication between the people that are talking. And as we lose that communication and focus, our brain continues to try and work harder to figure out what's going on. That is why by the end of your Zoom calls, you were tired. And if you have experienced this, it can be pretty exhausting. So that's the interesting thing about Zoom fatigue. And however, there is a group of folks that is showing some very good benefits for remote work. And I'll give you 1 second to sort of think about this group. Now, this isn't exclusive, but this is one of the groups of people that is finding that working remotely through a virtual platform actually helps them rather than hurts them or exhausts them. And what we're finding is that people with autism are finding this to be more beneficial than not. And you might be asking yourself why. Well, here's one of the reasons. One of the reasons is that persons with autism often are overstimulated in normal face-to-face interactions. and this is a typical thing with autism is the receptors that they use to gain information works overtime. And so it's not uncommon for people with autism to be photosensitive. Light causes them discomfort, particular textures on clothes, things like that. So one of the things with social interactions, and we call it awkwardness, social awkwardness, or failure to see cues, is that their brain is working so hard trying to pick up all this information that it's actually overstimulating their brain. So if you think about that, from what I just said, we take that person and we put them in a virtual setting, which automatically cuts a lot of that stuff out. They're gonna feel a lot more comfortable. And that's that's why human beings are so fascinating, because there is these subsets of things that defy what we think of as normal. So very interesting thing. There's a lot of these things that we're going to keep discovering, but that's just really cool. So that's what I'm going to say about that. We'll be right back with our question of the day. Stay tuned. All right. And today, again, the question of the day is sort of a ride off of last week's. Last week's question of the day was, why do we gossip? Well, interestingly enough, the question I got this week was, why are we nosy? Why do we stick our nose in other people's business? And again, there's a couple of reasons for this. We are social animals. We need to be around each other. However, we're also hierarchical, and I've mentioned this several times. So those two create competition. And what happens when we're being nosy is that we're actually looking into these people's private lives in order to compare ourselves with that person. Or, and this is a part of it too, we're looking for ways to decrease that person's status in that hierarchical system through efforts like gossip. Right. So again, this is what are we looking at here from a behavior standpoint? Well, if you think about it, we're looking at insecurity. Okay, and this is a very touchy subject for a lot of people. There's a lot of advice out there that says the less you care of what other people think, the better off you're going to be. That's a nice sentiment, but we can't go through life like that, because we have to have other people in our lives. And when we do, we are influenced by their behaviors as we influence their behaviors. And so when we say that you are completely responsible for your behaviors, we can say, yeah, that's true. But it takes that other input to help us get to these places, right? So this is where it complicates things. When somebody is being nosy, they are checking their social status, in a sense. They are looking to find out if what that person is doing behind the scenes. And if we look at it from that standpoint, we can say, well, if that person behind the scenes, if you come over to my house and you look around and you see, say, dirty dishes in the sink, right? Or here's one. How many have you gone into somebody's bathroom when you're visiting them and looked in their medicine cabinet, right? You're looking for stuff. Now, we can argue that you're looking for things that are similar to what's in your medicine cabinet, but we're also looking for things that may give us an edge, right? we're looking at what kind of medications does this person take? What does this person have in there? Because we have these sort of secret lives. We have our what was that called? Secret single behaviors, or secret single somethings. That we have a particular privacy issues, especially around the bathroom area, right? So we keep private things in the bathroom. There's a lot of privacy that surrounds that, and the medicine cabinet is one of them. What's in the medicine cabinet? So when we're doing that, we are looking for things to make us feel better, or things to make us relate to. We're doing it out of a sense of insecurity, because they're really, think about this. If you really were secure, why would you care what was in somebody else's cabinet? Why? Even curiosity carries that on us. I can't say this enough, that the basis of curiosity is still insecurity, folks. I know a lot of people argue with me about this. They say, no, that's not true, but it is true. I know I'm a super curious person, but I know what drives that. I want to know why things happen, because there's a sense of security when I do know. And what is the reflection of that need? That's insecurity. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying that's what it is. So when we go looking to be nosy, and we're all curious about what goes on behind the curtain. We're all curious about how the magic trick was done. We're all curious about what people do in their homes. So much so that some governments absolutely think they can spy on people and want to spy on people, because they want to root out any and all morality issues or non-law abiding issues, right? We don't like secrets. The unknown, right? The fear of the unknown. There it is. It's right there. The fear of the unknown. So we're nosy from a sense of competition, in a way to judge ourselves against other people, and to assuage our sense of insecurity about that person's privacy or private lives. And again, is it wrong? That goes back to the question of morality. Is it wrong? In certain circles, it is. In America, we have a very large market on our privacy. We want to keep things private. In other cultures, privacy isn't as much of an issue. But in America, we're very private people. And so it's a morality issue, especially when we have government officials or people prying into that privacy. Even if it's something that we know someone needs to reveal because they need help, we still have issues revealing that. It's still a big onus on people who have disabilities to tell other people that they have disabilities, because even though you might be telling me that so that I can help you, there's still a problem, because there's judgments, right? There's things that we can say against that. So the next time you think about it, think in terms of how would I feel if somebody's nosing around my stuff. And we have this sort of idea that when I'm doing it, it's okay, but when somebody does it to me, it's not okay. And that's one of our biases. That's how we justify these things with our prefrontal cortex. So that's the answer to that question. If you disagree, that's fine. Let me know about it. In fact, let me know about anything. Let me know about what you think about the topic today or last week's podcast. Comment. Send me questions, send me comments, send me challenges. That's cool. Write to me at mike@whatdrivesyou.net. I really want to engage with people about what their thoughts of. I'm not sitting here as a paragon of correctness. I am never going to tell you that I know everything there is to know about human behavior. I can tell you I know a lot because I study it, but it doesn't mean that I'm 100% correct, and it doesn't mean that I have all the information. It just means that I'm talking about it through the years of experience that I've learned about it, observed it, worked with it. I'm still going to be wrong. So let me know. Let me know what you think. And with that, have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.